Welcome, everyone. My name is Tina Christie, and I am the interim dean of the UCLA School of Education and Information Studies. Thank you all for joining us for this UCLA book launch event. Tonight's event features the book, Beyond Free College, Making Higher Education Work for 21st Century Students. As pandemic life continues, so too do our virtual events. Normally, we would host this event on campus and welcome all of you here. In fact, my virtual background is the room in which I would have loved to have hosted all of you here at UCLA. With our continued focus and efforts in public health, I am hopeful that we will soon return to seeing one another in person. But for now, thank you, and I'm thrilled to have you with us tonight, virtually. We are particularly proud of this new book because one of the authors is a dean here at UCLA. The amazing Eileen Strempel is the inaugural dean of the Herb Alpert School of Music at UCLA. I am delighted to note that besides being an author of this timely and insightful book on education policy, as you might guess, Dean Strempel has a musical background and is a celebrated opera singer who has performed with, just to name two, Wolf Trap Opera and Opera Theater St. Louis. Before joining UCLA's Herb Alpert School of Music as dean, she served as the Senior Vice Provost for Academic Affairs at the University of Cincinnati. She is also an American Council on Education Fellow and a Presidential Scholar in the Arts who has become a nationally recognized champion for college transfer students. Stephen Handel, also a very esteemed colleague, previously served as the Chief Admissions Officer for the University of California System. He is currently the Executive Director of Higher Education Assessment for the College Board. He consults with universities to implement enrollment practices that serve the needs of first-year and transfer students alike. At UCLA School of Education and Information Studies, we are concerned with educational success, and we understand well the importance of a college degree in addressing the economic inequalities and social inequalities that today seem so apparent to us. Inequalities in health, wealth, community well-being. We want every person who aspires to attend college. The challenge, of course, is not just getting young people into college, but for ensuring that all who are admitted enroll, stay in college, and ultimately obtain their degree. This is challenging for so many. When you consider the rising costs of college expenses, and especially for those who need to work their way to live while paying and attending college, and this is particularly difficult for our first generation college-going students. One of our major interests here in EdNIS is closely aligned with the issues investigated in this new book. That being the role of the community college as one of the most important first steps on a path to earning a college degree. And one of the most important first steps for young people from under-resourced schools and communities. We are looking to identify practices and policies that best facilitate and support successful community college transfer and degree completion for students from communities that we are so committed to serving as a public institution. We have been developing a new UCLA education initiative focusing on strengthening community college leadership, and several of our faculty and students are involved in research on the community college and the community college student. Thus, I am so delighted to have you all joining us today for our discussion on the research and scholarship presented in this new book, Beyond Free College. Eileen and Stephen take up a simple yet bold thesis for this book by addressing a brave question. How can we improve the 100-year-old transfer pathway between community colleges and four-year institutions? What our authors have created in this book is a new agenda for how we as a nation can do a better job supporting a most important segment of schooling and the students who pursue a community college education as a pathway to earning their college degree. In their research, they examine the most up-to-date trends in higher education, online learning, prior learning assessment, competency-based learning, high school college credit, and the shifting needs of our transfer students. Their book outlines a consequential agenda for our nation's higher education sector that frames degree completion, not just access to higher education, as what must become our new goal and our new benchmark of success. They are proposing an effort to reimagine the transfer function for this new generation, an agenda that is much needed. I am confident that Beyond Free College will spark a fresh new policy vision for our higher education systems for this next generation. I want to congratulate our authors on this accomplishment.
Aww.
So for the next 30 minutes or so, it's going to be my honor to facilitate a conversation with Eileen and Stephen as they launch this important new book. And so with that, I will start with an opening question, if that's okay with the two of you. And I really, truly, I mean, I understand what you both do. And as two of the busiest people that I know, I'd love for you to tell us what motivated you to write this book.
Well, first, Tina, thank you, and thank you to the School of Education and IS for just inviting us this evening. This is just such an honor and a pleasure and a delight for us, and you are a very gracious host and a fabulous colleague. So please, thank you to you and your team. You know, this is one of those serendipitous things. The series editor, whose name is Debbie Sido, has this amazing series, which I'm sure many of you are well acquainted with, the Future series on community colleges. And she approached us with this idea, and you know, just knowing the folks that have been involved with this series, I just kind of thought, really, you want us to contribute to this? And I just thought, I can't turn it down. But then I had to turn to Steve and.
Well, and on top of that as well, as you know this, Tina, I mean, she's an enormously convincing individual. I just left the University of California. I'd taken a new job. I said, I don't have time to write a book, Eileen. Thank you, but no thank you. But she's very convincing. And, you know, it also speaks to a topic that both of us have been working on for years and years about, you know, the mission of community colleges and the work of four-year institutions, especially like UCLA, which are great partners for this transfer. We see it as transformative. And so, all right, Eileen, I'll help you write a book.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I will say that it is so important to us to be thinking about the ways in which people from across our campuses are thinking about what it means to serve the community college student. And at an institution like UCLA, you know, we have, it's not as straightforward as we hope it would be. And so when we have two champions like you who write a book like this, I think it's just critical for us to talk about it. And so thank you, as I said, and congratulations. So describe for us the kind of book that you set out to write. How did the trajectory of the book change over time? You got into your research, you got into your writing, you know, you started with this idea.
You know, I'll take a stab at it. I mean, what the book I thought we were going to write was a book about the traditional transfer pathway students going to a community college for a couple of years, making that transfer to a 4-year institution and earning a baccalaureate degree. That was my trajectory when I was a kid. I went to Cosumnes River Community College near Sacramento and went to Sac State after that, and then UCLA after that. So I'm a product of the California Master Plan, and I just thought that's the trajectory every student follows. And so that's the framework I had. But Eileen's much more of a visionary. She says, no, I think it's broader, and I think it's more important. I mean, would that be fair, Eileen?
Well, I just think that like most books, when you start to write them, you have an idea. And originally we did think of just writing about the traditional transfer pathway, that 2-year to 4-year pathway. But our research revealed these emerging trends, which I think COVID has just accelerated. I don't think they're new. I just think it's just poured some accelerant on it. But these transformative trends in higher education that just have had a huge impact on students. And that when we delved into who are today's students, we actually ended up coining a new term together, partly because I didn't like the kind of post-traditional age or non-traditional. It just seems so negative. And instead we came up with the term of neotraditional. This is the new normal. This is the way it is. So the students that we're thinking of that are, not the 18 to 22-year-olds, from perhaps a lower socioeconomic status, coming from a historically underrepresented group, folks who are parenting students. And we became very specific as the book evolved in making sure that we were calling them parent students, because if your kid's calling, you're going to go there first. So really starting to get our arms around what was happening. I mean, we didn't predict COVID-19. Who predicts a global pandemic? I'm missing that magic ball. But it has accelerated this trend of transfer. And now students are bringing credits really from a minimum of 3 different locations on average. So they start accumulating those credits back in high school. And as they are going to these multiple institutions, we started to understand that this attempt to cobble together a certificate or degree, which is just so critical to really having a life-sustaining wage, is becoming increasingly difficult. And we just talked to a couple of graduate students before we began, and families are really feeling squeezed given increased costs with sending a kid to college. And yet tonight, we all know that earning that higher education certificate, that degree, it has that lifetime impact of almost $1 million, perhaps more depending on the field. But it's more than that. It's their job security. It's the participation in their community. It's the participation in democracy. And lacking that post-secondary certificate, you're just much more susceptible to the vagaries of the economy, or right now of a pandemic. In the United States today, and this is a statistic that just like wrenches my heart, we have 36 million Americans who have some college, no degree. Compare that to the traditional student, where there's 3 million entering first-year students. So it's just a huge percentage. And in this book, really, at the end of the day, we didn't start out writing it for them, but by the end of the day, this is the book that we ended up writing. It's for those 36 million. They're nearly 20% of American adults. And out of those Americans, that 36 million, 40% of them have the worst possible combination, which is some college and no degree.
So for researchers out there as well, I mean, that once you start diving into a topic, right, you kind of go, oh my gosh, it's bigger than we thought. Very few students begin at a community college for 2 years and then make that transfer. They are, as Eileen mentioned, cobbling together units and courses maybe they had taken even in high school through dual enrollment or AP or IB or a variety of things. They go to a community college, but then they have to work. And that is extended over many years oftentimes before they are able to pull together the kind of combination of courses that will allow them to transfer. And the more we dived into it, we thought, well, it's not just community college, is it? It's as Eileen said, these 36 million Americans who earnestly have the talent, right, to complete a degree, were it not for the fact that life intrudes. And the pandemic has certainly shown us that.
Yes, right.
And I know at the School of Ed, you're so much about social justice and equity, and the book became, in various manifestations, more and more about that. And as the Pell Research Institute statistic revealed to us, a student from the bottom quartile of income only has an 11% chance of completing a 4-year degree. So putting it a different way, it's like 90% of the students from the lowest income quartile will fail to graduate.
Yes.
That's just huge. And so as a country, we've just got a long way to go.
Yeah, yeah. It is really it's a remarkable statistic that you cite, and it speaks to nothing short of a crisis. And so, and you know, I'm really interested in hearing a bit more about, and thank you for that, because that was so, it really helps frame our understanding of, your research, where you landed in terms of the journey, the research journey, and how you came to, I think, some of the really important recommendations that you make in the book. And, we know this, particularly in California, but across the country, college students have become increasingly more diverse. That's a good thing. That is what we hope to have happen. That's with respect to socioeconomic background, race, ethnicity, age, geography, all of the things you talked about, parenting. So, and I love the term, the neo-traditional student. So yes, and we're going to talk about that here in the School of Education and Information Studies. I promise you that. What does this increasing number of the neo-traditional student, what are the implications for public universities, private universities, for us here at UCLA? What are the kinds of things now that we need to be thinking about and doing? Understanding that this is now our student.
Well, again, I'll take a stab at it. I mean, when I was with the University of California, I was there for a quarter of a century, and there, this is going to sound like I'm blowing smoke, but there's no better university system that attempts to accommodate the needs of community college transfer students than the University of California. But it's been through many years of hard-fought work, not by me, but by colleagues across the system who have seen the value early on of bringing in, of understanding that diversity and making sure that California's diversity is represented in its most public institutions. Now, that requires a commitment, at least from an enrollment manager, of an understanding that you've got the sort of traditional, those first-year students for which you've got hundreds of thousands of applications already. It's a hugely demanding situation, but then also a recognition that there is this other pipeline, this critical pipeline that was designed precisely to provide the kind of access to public education that the framers of the master plan thought about 60 years ago. And it places unique demands upon a place like yours, Tina, all the campuses of the University of California, but it's one in which they've recognized that value of knowing who those students are. So that's first, I think, and most important, is recognizing the fact that these neo-traditional students are the future of higher education, and if we don't serve them, we're going to have to be closing our doors.
Yeah, right.
And I think the other piece, and we can delve into some of this a little more deeply, but I think that the piece that Steve and I quickly started to realize is that we have to move beyond the conversation of just free college and really open up the larger philosophical question of how do we best fund higher education as a nation? Because as taxpayers, we're already paying a tremendous amount of money. We invest in education. And as I don't have to tell a researcher like you, Tina, there is a wealth of longitudinal research that tells us what works and what doesn't. And so really at the heart of it, we really wanted to understand where our national investments were paying off, and sometimes pretty dramatically, and when we were spending money that really would have best been invested in other ways.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah.
And so, Steve, you can even start with back in high school, back in your.
Well, part of all of this was trying to understand that we've got this huge investment that America makes, a huge investment in access. You know, there's a great deal of debate about who's getting into Harvard or who's getting into the Ivies or the UCs, but that's not the real conversation. Access is available. Access to college in America is almost universal. The question, of course, is that we're not really producing the kinds of certificates and degree numbers that we need, right? So a lot of students are getting into college, but they're not finishing that critical certificate, that 2-year degree or that 4-year degree, and therefore they're not going to be able to go to professional school, graduate school, or have the jobs that they need to have. So, and this was actually Eileen's doing. I mean, we would have these conversations. It was great. We'd have Friday afternoon conversations, and we'd sort of review what we were thinking about, and she'd come back with a number of these things going, well, there's this wonderful program here. Maybe we talk about a program at LA Valley, right over the hill there in the San Fernando Valley. And then she'd call again with another program in Utah. Here and there, places where people have been doing good work for a long time, demonstrating that it's not enough to get them in. It's critical that you think about how you graduate them. And I'll say just one more thing and be quiet. The Beyond Free College movement was key for us because finally, and I think you know this as well, and for all our colleagues in higher education, finally, the higher education agenda was bubbling up in this presidential election. And this free college notion, a notion that we are completely sympathetic to. Our only argument is we don't think it goes far enough. But we were so taken with the notion that finally higher education was getting its due in the massive discussion. So that was part of the reason for the book, was to say, yes, let's continue this conversation. Let's keep pushing, but let's make sure we're investing wisely.
Right. Yeah.
And so I'll jump to one of the investments that we'll talk about the grand vision that slowly evolved, but one of those simple investments that really ended up again being a social justice issue for us. So I'm not ashamed to admit that when Steve and I started to do research, I was very skeptical about what's known as prior learning assessment. So it's for those of you who aren't in on the lingo, it's a kind of a fancy term, but it's really best understood in the context of internships. So for traditional students, there's a sense among parents like, oh, I want my son or daughter to, while they're in college, go have a work experience. And somehow colleges, we all think that that's a good idea, right? It's going to help ladder someone into a career. And we figured out how to give college credit or how to transcript that. And, it makes everyone happy. So then why can't we do that for our neo-traditional students, those students that are out there in the workplace and are looking for credit for the exact same activities that we just transcripted for the traditional student? So we really started to see things through a social justice equity lens. And what we need to make sure is that those 36 million Americans that are out there working, that they've got that on-ramp back into higher education. And the findings, the longitudinal research here is dramatic. And so again, for someone who like me started out completely skeptical, we're just giving away credit. I had an epiphany, a 180-degree turn. The research is unassailable, and I was completely wrong. Actually, students, when you give them prior learning credits, they're 2.5 times as likely to graduate if they have 9 prior learning credits. 2.5, not like 20% more or twice as likely, 2.5. So there are these kinds of findings which I don't think are actually that hard, right? We already do it for our traditional students. Why can't we do it for our neo-traditional students? So when you really talk about trying to find ways that are research proven, longitudinally effective, and actually pretty low cost, these are the types of things that we really need to be urging people to implement on a national scale. We need national policy to change here.
And Steve, you're shaking your head there, of course, and I can imagine your Friday afternoon discussions.
She's very persuasive, is all I can say. But she had to deliver the goods. I mean, it's like I wasn't sure about prior learning assessment either, honestly. But the data are very impressive. So we call on all colleagues to sort of dive into that a little bit. But I would only say, Tina, forgive me, is that there is this difficult lesson for higher education to learn, though. We don't transfer credit very well, very effectively across these variety of platforms, whether it be AP, dual enrollment, prior learning assessments. The GAO came out with a report. This is, I think, in 2017 now, that documented huge disjunctures between both public and private institutions in the ways in which students could bring credit to bear on a degree. And granted, there are going to be places and times when that credit shouldn't be applicable to a student. If you're taking, a course in welding and you suddenly decide to be, a major in English Lit, I can understand that disjuncture. But by and large, what the GAO was reporting was that even within general education kinds of credits, students weren't seeing that portability. So we have our own work to do, I think, internally.
Excellent. You've touched upon, I think, some of the key issues that you raise in the book and in important policy agenda items. I'll ask you for a moment just to step back and describe for us your higher education agenda. It's ambitious, but I think just in terms of where we are right now, what is your argument to policymakers who might reasonably say, we can't afford your plan right now?
Well, I think, not to speak for Steve, but at the end of the day, our key belief really came down to, we have to guarantee access to higher education that comes with the necessary academic and life supports. It's as Steve said, it's not about access. Almost everyone can have a community college, within driving distance. That there are educational deserts, but especially with online learning, the access is not the issue. And so we argue for a new metric, which is cost per degree completed. What other business do you not measure the desired outcome and monitor its cost and how effectively you're getting there? So we really talk about, if that's our metric, cost per degree, then why aren't we thinking about how that happens most effectively and looking at replicable models? So if we looked at the CUNY system in New York with their ASAP program, is the accelerated study and associate program. So really designed for folks to get their 2-year degree and then transfer successfully to their baccalaureate and complete the baccalaureate degree. And students in the program, they receive all those additional life supports right? They get the Metro card, so they're not worried about getting to school. They make sure their books are paid for. They have a dedicated advisor. They have classes that are blocked together because they recognize these students are working students. And it's by design to facilitate the lives of working adults. They have priority class registration and so on and so forth. And yes, the upfront costs are higher. It's roughly about $6,500 per student upfront costs. But when you measure the degree completion, it's a dramatic doubling of the graduation rates for kids in that program. And so that means that it's a dramatically lower cost per degree awarded. And not only, and this is where we're hoping we can really find a way to speak across the aisle and look forward to questions that will help us do that. Not only is this a more effective, cost-effective way of actually getting degree completion, but there's a huge societal return. And this is the part where my heart just sings. Right? Even Republicans should be happy. There's a whopping $3 to $4. MDNC has replicated this research numerous times. For every dollar invested in the program, society gets $3 to $4 back because those graduates, not surprisingly, have higher paying jobs. They pay taxes. They don't need to avail themselves of government services. And they tend to become model citizens. They don't go to jail. And then here's the benefit we can't even calculate. Their students, their kids are more likely to become students and graduate. So this is a transformative investment that just crosses the generational divide. And we really believe is the only way to really move the dial on systemic intergenerational inequality at scale. It's higher education done right, wisely, and well.
Eileen says it as well as anyone around, but the calculus is pretty clear. And we think that calculus works regardless of one's political preference, because in the end, we're here to make appropriate and effective investments. And again, some people might reasonably argue, well, okay, if these programs were so great, why aren't they all over? And that's a question that Eileen and I asked ourselves as well. But we found that different areas have different needs. So, for instance, there is a particular program in Utah. Eileen, forgive me, I don't remember the name right off, but it is in the book, and she talks about it at length, in which they have flipped the curriculum. So, in that particular community, the first thing a student works on is a certificate, so that there is a labor market value, a family sustaining wage that comes out of that first investment in college. Now, again, the traditional model is to do general education courses, get those other pre-major courses, get yourself transferred, go to a four-year. But for many students, and as Eileen mentioned earlier, in places where there are not a lot of resources, that's a non-starter. You're simply not going to go to college if that's the only option you've got. You've got to be able to say, you know what, I'm going to try for this. I'm going to get my certificate. I'm going to dive into this work, and then I'm going to come back. And I think that's what a lot of those 36 million Americans did. But now are prevented from doing that for one reason or another. Maybe it's portability of credit, maybe whatever. But these are simple ideas. Now, we're not saying that idea gets to be applied across the country, but there are a number of these ideas that I think, if plugged in appropriately in communities as we understand them, might well be very effective in increasing degree completion.
Right, right. You raise such important points, and I have a colleague at one of the local community colleges who likes to describe it. He's developed many of these programs as get in, get out, and get going.
I like it.
I love
Yeah.
it. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And so I can appreciate all that your research points to in terms of the importance of that degree completion and that transfer and leaving with something tangible. So when you have that degree or certificate in hand, you can enter into the workforce and you can really push against these, structural inequalities that we've all been talking about with respect to access to education, completion in education, wealth disparities, health disparities, everything that, the black light is just illuminating in ways that is important for us to see at this particular moment in time. So Eileen, I'm going to point to you and ask you a specific question, because I'm sure that there are people on our campus who are interested in understanding how this research connects up with your role here at UCLA as the inaugural dean of the Alpert School of Music, because I don't think that people see this as the work of the dean of a school of music. And so I appreciate all that you do as a colleague, as an educator, as a researcher, this work. And I think it would just be interesting to hear a bit about how this connects up to your work as a dean here.
Wow, that's such a beautiful question. Thank you. I don't want to seem like a non sequitur here, but forgive me for just a moment. The research that I was always doing throughout my PhD and since then has really been on the work of women composers. I always figured Mozart was going to be fine without me. And really understanding, even though it was in a different field, the importance of having advocates and beyond that, champions. And really feeling that was where I could make a difference and really transforming the curriculum a little bit, again, outside the bounds of maybe what was traditional. And yet linking both of these deep interests in terms of really trying to be an advocate and a champion. At the School of Music, I'm proud to say that we're looking at, in the 2 years that I've been here, hopefully about 150% increase in the number of transfer students that we'll be having this fall. I was just getting an update from my enrollment management person here. And I just think that that's what it takes, across campus, is for is a lot of transfer champions. It really is a culture change. And Stephen and I have a dear friend, Alpert Herrera, who's here at the Community College Partnership Program here at UCLA. And we've all been transfer advocates for years together. And we really talk about how important it is to have a proactively welcoming ecosystem. And it's not, again, it's not just about access. It's really about the support and really trying to, in that lived experience, trying to feel like you're helping to move the dial, even if it's just a tiny bit. That's what makes the day worth living.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, I think it's important for us to make sure that we have an identity as a degree completion institution. And that be part of what we talk about on campus. As people serving as deans of schools here at UCLA, certainly I believe that our colleagues are committed to UCLA being a degree completion university, and we have to look at our practices in our programs and make sure that they match that value that we hold dearly. So I have to ask this question because this has been in the news of late, and maybe it won't be a surprise that we've been hearing that President Biden is in favor of canceling $10,000 in student loan debt per borrower. And his Democratic colleagues are asking him to actually increase that amount to $50,000 per borrower, and to do so immediately through an executive action. So based on the work that you've done, I'm very interested in hearing from both of you. What are your thoughts on this proposal?
I'll take a stab at it only because, first of all, it's wonderful that we're having discussions about higher education policy in America again. And again, reasonable men and women will differ, and that's precisely what we do here in a democracy. Here's the question that I have. I certainly agree with the loan industry and loan repayment has been a very, very difficult and fraught issue for a number of years. So I'm certainly in favor of reducing the debt for students who, for no fault of their own, can only access higher education through student loans. The question I have to ask my colleagues, though, is in reducing that debt, what are the other things we're going to do to make sure that those students use that leverage to complete their degree? Now, it makes sense on its face, right, to say, well, if you pull away that level of debt, then they have more degrees of freedom in order to do that. So I agree, but I think we need to be pretty explicit about how that works. And so to implement some of the things that we have in the book, I think would be appropriate. So I guess I'm not really arguing with it. I'm just basically saying I think it goes hand in hand. But we need to be intentional and strategic. That would be my argument to the president when he calls.
Well, you know what? Maybe just on our webinar this evening.
I do think that as Stephen and I came towards the end of the book, writing a completely different book than the one we'd started out to write, that we really, we were inspired by the work of Suzanne Mettler, who's a distinguished professor, poli-sci professor at Cornell, and her book, actually, the GI Bill, The Making of the Greatest Generation. And what we ended up coming up with at the end was really using the GI Bill as an example. We did it already as a country. We've already invested in this type, in this substantial way, in a way that was focused not just on the cost of attendance, but really on the full life support. So for GIs coming back from World War II, and generally they were white men that they returned to the United States. They were looking for employment and advancement, and part of the GI Bill allowed them to go to college. We paid for housing, we paid for food, we paid for books. And so we've done it before. We've already proven the return. Again, the research there is unassailable. It was the making of the greatest generation. And so as we think about this admirable work, we really need to think about today's completion rates. And we really need to think about how we move the dial, and that's just our new horizon here. It's having those GI Bill-like supports and focusing on degree completion.
And I would only add to that, with the pandemic, which we don't treat in the book, because we didn't predict it like everybody else, but we are going through right now a very transformative time, a time in which we'll probably measure our own lives before and after in many ways. And it's not to equate it with world wars or anything along those lines, but we're also at a very fragile time, I think, for the nation. And so when you think about, okay, where would the appropriate investments be, so that we come out stronger than when we came in? And that's certainly what the GI Bill did. It was an understanding of what the future might look like, and they posed those investments and they worked. And I think we're at the same kind of historical moment.
Yeah.
And perhaps even more so. I mean, if we're looking now at the FAFSA filers, new freshmen, first year students, FAFSA filers in California fell by 21%. According to the National Student Clearinghouse. So, and dramatically lower rates from historically underrepresented students and students from low income brackets. So if we really want to move the dial, and we really want to kind of, if we think about these really twin pandemics of racial reckoning and this collapse in the wake of COVID, this is a way to kind of really move the dial in a substantive way. So I think whatever investments we make, we need to make sure that they're research informed and that they're really having the outcomes that we're hoping for and we need.
Thank you. You know, this is such a rich discussion, and I'm going to ask our webinar facilitator to open up the chat. We have a couple of questions that I think you would be open to addressing from some of the folks on the webinar. And I'm just going to start with one that I think follows from what you were saying. And the question is, does a free college for all approach necessarily translate to equitable outcomes? Perhaps if the authors can speak to the policy clash that Pete Buttigieg and AOC had in late 2019.
Yes, it's a fair point. And I think that's why the book takes a stand beyond free college in the sense of there are investments that the individual must make. And that's central to completion. So when one makes the argument, oh, well, we're just opening up the doors, we're making it free, and then everyone's going to feel it. No, in fact, what we talk about are providing the degrees of freedom for men and women to make the kind of commitment that is critical for earning a college degree. And that's going to take work. So you provide those supports. And they do. So the analogy, of course, is to well-resourced students who can go to college full-time. And as you two faculty folks there, I think, would agree, immersing yourself completely in a full-time program is what college is best at. And students who don't have that opportunity, who for a variety of reasons have to go part-time, completely appropriate, we've seen the research quite clearly say that if we are able to support students full-time, the degree completion, that outcome happens even better.
Yeah, right. Excellent, thank you, Steve. I'm going to jump to another question that was also posed in the chat. So for community colleges that serve more low-income, historically excluded, minoritized students, they're also not receiving aid to cover the complete cost of college, for example, basic needs, books, transportation. On average, a four-year university student receives more in aid. In your findings, what did you see in terms of financial aid equity?
Again, this is kind of going to that beyond free college, because we can start to address this financial aid equity when we're providing the financial resources for these academic and life supports for the students who don't have the means to provide them for themselves. And so it really is a way of very intentionally going to the community colleges, which are the most under-resourced component of our educational systems across the country, and making sure that through programs like the CUNY ASAP program, that we are covering that complete cost of college. And beyond that, I mean, it also needs to look at the needs of parent students that we were mentioning at the top of the conversation. We were stunned by the recent statistics. 27% of American college-going students are parent students. So to not include childcare, you want to talk about financial aid equity and making sure that education is available to those with the means and the will to pursue it. That's a huge equity issue, and that's just the type of investment that we're talking about.
Great, thank you. Another really important question raised by one of our participants. So California Community College funding and spending is beholden to a board of trustees, locally elected, while Prop 13 eliminated taxing power, faculty obligation number, 50% rule, et cetera. Plus, community colleges are underfunded compared to four-year universities, and the funds that are provided barely allow for increased need for mental health, student services, basic needs, and so on. What are the policy implications pertaining to shifts in budget allocations? What are the policy implications there? What's needed with respect to shifts in budget allocations? What are your thoughts on that?
I'm gonna tread in dangerous ground here. There's a certain irony in California. We have the largest community college system in the country, and as Eileen mentioned earlier, within you're generally within driving distance of almost any community college in the state, and that's enormous access. And so for our very lowest resource students, we often have a number of opportunities, financial Pell Grants, BEOG. We have other supports for our poorest students to begin to be able to go to college. But once you hit that line, that cutoff line, the resources are far less available. And beyond that, we oftentimes leave money on the table from a policy perspective because our fees are very, very low. Now, do not misunderstand me. This is not an argument to raise fees, but this is an argument to say, how can we raise that money? For instance, four-year institutions often have higher fees and have higher graduation rates precisely because the tuition rates are higher because they're going to student services that in effect help students go through. Community colleges have a very thin margin there, if any. And so we're going to need to find a way to figure that out, because just paying for tuition, just paying for the cost isn't going to be enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I hear you on that. We have a specific question that I think would help some of our participants to understand a little bit more about prior learning experiences. And so someone asked, are prior learning experiences similar to adding badges to transcripts?
That's an interesting question. You know, it actually touches on something I found pretty fascinating. And this was really, so first of all, I would say that this is getting increasingly murky. And one of the questions that we pose in the book for those that are reticent to give credit for workplace-based learning on the part of our neo-traditional students is, well, really? Are you so sure that your hospitality school is giving a better instruction than the Four Seasons? You know, is that really where you want that certification to come from? And so really starting to understand that higher education, in order to thrive in the 21st century, really needs to be much more proactive in collaborating with business in terms of making sure that we create educational on-ramps for those 36 million Americans. Because if we don't, yes, that's what we'll have. We'll have LinkedIn badges. But the issue that tends to really rub me there is then those credentials don't stack. It's not like the Brigham Young University no credit left behind strategy where you start with that earning a certificate, say in retail management, and then you get an associate's degree, and then you graduate with a bachelor's degree in business. So that as you come back in and out, each credential enhances your wage, enhances your life, but there's a trajectory. And the problem with those badges is right now, they don't end up stacking. And so it tends to reinforce inequality. But it is a warning sign for us in education that we must collaborate with our business and industry partners, even though that kind of can make people nervous. And I'm cognizant of that, but we've got to find a way to do it, folks. It's equity, it's ethical, and they're going to eat our lunch if we don't. So it's there's a kind of both a moral and ethical imperative, but also just a business imperative that we really have to look at that.
Excellent. Thank you.
I will raise just kind of one kind of point that's the questioning didn't go there, but I do think it's important. Is I know it kind of seems like Steve and I might just want to be spending money everywhere, but which is probably true. But we also do question a lot of the investments that we make, and maybe Steve can talk about some of the ones in high school. I just want to take a moment to talk a little bit about some of the online partnerships that are currently being subsidized by all of us, taxpayers. So if you look at the very famous Starbucks ASU collaboration, where students have to fill out that federal financial aid form. So we're paying the tuition there. Any money that's not covered by that Pell Grant is covered by Starbucks, which sounds great until you realize that the tax code gives Starbucks back that money as employee development funds. So you're paying that too. And those outcomes without those, without that support, it's not access. It doesn't get you the degree completion. So we're spending a huge amount of money, both above board in terms of the Pell Grant investment and in a submerged way with this tax code benefit to companies, that we're not reaping the benefits there. So there's also money that we shouldn't be investing, that we could invest more wisely.
Excellent.
But maybe Steve, you want to talk about some of the high school ones?
Well, only again, the high school area as well. And now again, full disclosure, I work at the College Board. The College Board produces the advanced placement, but the College Board has been very relentless, and I don't work for the AP program specifically, but has been relentless in trying to expand the idea that it's not about a test, it's about taking that course. And we've got to provide those courses to as many students as possible. Why? Because it prepares them well for college, and we see completion rates go up, and we see completion rates go up across the board. But it's not about testing. It's about diving into that curriculum. So, you know, we take some shots in the book about research that doesn't work, but really it's a more positive focused book about here is where the research shows where we may have a great place to take off.
Yeah, and it does a wonderful job at that. So I'm being mindful of our time, and as we conclude our discussion, I'm just going to ask both of you, what final points would you like to impress upon the audience and the education community about the book and your research?
Wow. Steve, you want to go first or second?
Only, only that this kind of engagement. I mean, I'm not a faculty person, and I live in the world of application. If I'm, as an enrollment manager, so my life isn't in research. But what I think and what I hope the book brings out is folks who work around the country and right there at UCLA on these very practical issues and are seeing success. I think that's the book's greatest accomplishment.
I'm half Irish and half German, so I'm always smiling. I'm always looking for some rainbow here. And to me, but I'm practical. I'm half German. I want to make sure that what we're investing in really works and pays off. And You know, we just stand on the shoulders of so many great researchers, many right here at UCLA. And I know we can all agree that education just offers the possibility of upward mobility across generations and, you know, provides the means for citizens to improve their understanding of public life, their capacity to participate in it. It enhances, it is the most democratic thing we could possibly be doing as a country. And so I just do urge at this particular moment of really twin pandemics for us to, as a country, double down, invest in all of our citizens and making sure that they have the opportunity to not just have access, but the support to complete their degrees.
Excellent. Well, thank you both so much. This has been such an enriching conversation for me. And I hope that we can continue the conversation as, you know, the book is just hot off the press. And so I thank you for choosing Ed and IS in this webinar as what I believe is the first stop in what will be many stops in conversations about the book. And I think the book is going to get a lot of attention, and I invite you to come back and to talk about the book again after you've spent some time out there and had an opportunity to address others and their questions in response to what you offer. You know, what's wonderful about the book is what you said, Steve. It's grounded in research. It's scholarship, but it offers an agenda for what we can do as we move forward and how we can do better at ensuring that all students who set out to earn that college degree can do so, and do so, you know, without incurring the kinds of debt that we know is just so difficult and is so burdensome today for so many young people. I look forward to talking more about the transfer student and the agenda that you have in shaping how this might look here at UCLA for the UC. I am strongly committed to degree completion and seeing our next generation of Bruins walk across the stage, the literal stage, I hope.
Absolutely.
Amen to that one.
Absolutely.
Very, very soon.
This has been great. Thank you so much for hosting us. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much to you and the Education School and IS. It's just amazing. I'm so happy to have you as colleagues, as friends, and thank you to everyone for joining us tonight.
Congratulations. Thank you again.
Take care, everyone.
Good night.